Imagine you're 26 years old. You have no money, no connections, no family name that anyone respects. You're not even from the country you're trying to lead. And yet, within 10 years, you will command the largest army Europe has ever seen, rewrite the legal systems of entire civilizations, and make kings beg for your approval. Then, within 15 years of that, you'll die alone on a tiny volcanic island in the middle of the South Atlantic Ocean, dictating your memoirs to servants who are slowly losing the will to live. This is the story of Napoleon Bonaparte, and I promise you, it is stranger, darker, and more insane than any movie you've ever watched. Here's the question at the center of this story. How does a nobody from a tiny island become the most powerful man on Earth, and then throw it all away so spectacularly that historians are still arguing about whether he was a genius or a madman? Because here's the thing most people get wrong about Napoleon. They think he was a great general who got unlucky. But the real story is far more complicated and far more human. Let's go back to the beginning. It's the 1780s. Europe is basically a continent-sized Game of Thrones, except the dragons are artillery cannons and everyone smells significantly worse. France, at this point, is the richest, most powerful kingdom in the Western world. Versailles has more gold on its ceilings than most countries have in their entire treasuries. King Louis XVI and his wife Marie Antoinette are living lives of extraordinary luxury. Meanwhile, roughly 98% of France is starving. And I mean that almost literally. Bread, the most basic food imaginable, costs so much that ordinary French families are spending 80 to 90% of their income just to eat. Children are malnourished. Peasants are working land they don't own for landlords they'll never meet, paying taxes to a government that treats them like furniture. It's basically the worst wealth inequality you can imagine. Think of it like this. If social media existed in 1788, the French nobility would be posting their Versailles vacation photos while their followers were literally dying of hunger in the comments. Something was going to break. And in 1789, it did. The French Revolution exploded. The king was arrested, then executed. Then his wife was executed. Then, and this is the part people forget, the revolutionaries started executing each other. The period called the Reign of Terror saw France's new government guillotine over 17,000 people in less than 2 years. France had gone from "we're getting rid of the monarchy" to complete bloody chaos in record time. It was basically the fastest political self-destruction in history. And into this absolute mess steps our guy. Napoleon Bonaparte was born in 1769 on the island of Corsica, which had only become French territory the year before he was born. So technically, he spent his entire childhood in a place that had literally just been sold to France like a piece of real estate. He wasn't really French. He spoke French with an accent his whole life. His classmates at military school in Paris mocked him constantly. He was small, awkward, foreign, and poor. Sounds like the origin story for either a great hero or a supervillain. Spoiler, it's kind of both. But here's where Napoleon's story becomes genuinely extraordinary. The guy could think. Not just smart, differently smart. While other military commanders were still using tactics from 100 years ago, Napoleon saw war like a chess grandmaster seeing 12 moves ahead. He understood that speed, surprise, and keeping your enemy confused were worth more than numbers.
At 26, he was given command of a French army that was underfed, under-equipped, and almost completely demoralized. Within a year, he had led them on a campaign through Italy so fast and so devastating that the Austrian Empire, one of the great powers of Europe, essentially handed him a peace treaty and said, "Okay, you win. Please stop." He was 27 years old. And this is where things get interesting. Because Napoleon didn't celebrate and go home. He looked at France, still in political chaos, still without a stable government, and he made a decision. In 1799, he staged a coup. He walked into the French legislature with soldiers, announced that he was taking control, and watched as elected representatives literally jumped out of windows to escape him. That's not a metaphor. They actually jumped out the windows. And just like that, Napoleon was in charge of France. He was 30 years old.
Now, here's where most people's understanding of Napoleon gets fuzzy, because for a while, he was genuinely great. He reformed France's legal system into what we now call the Napoleonic Code, which became the foundation of law in dozens of countries, including most of Latin America and the state of Louisiana. He built roads, he modernized education, he stabilized the economy. He was basically running France like a hyper-competent startup CEO, except instead of disrupting the taxi industry, he was reorganizing an entire civilization.
But here's the thing about power. It's addictive. And Napoleon's appetite was, let's say, not easily satisfied. By 1804, he declared himself emperor, not just leader of France, emperor. He literally took the crown from the Pope's hands and placed it on his own head during the coronation ceremony. And then the war started. Real wars. Not defensive campaigns, conquest. Britain, Austria, Prussia, Russia, Spain, Portugal, the Ottoman Empire. Napoleon fought them all, and for a while, he won. By 1810, Napoleon controlled or directly influenced almost all of continental Europe. Kings were his brothers, literally. He handed thrones to his siblings like most people give out birthday gifts. The map of Europe had been redrawn by one man's ambition. But this is where the story gets dark. And this is the part most history books leave out. The human cost was catastrophic. The Napoleonic Wars killed somewhere between 3.5 and 6 million soldiers. Civilian deaths may have doubled that. Entire generations of French men were conscripted, sent to fight in places they'd never heard of, and never came home. Spain became a nightmare. Napoleon put his brother on the Spanish throne and expected the Spanish people to just accept it. They didn't. What followed was a brutal guerrilla war that the French could never quite win, one that drained French resources for years. Goya, the Spanish painter, documented the atrocities. The images are haunting. They look like something from a modern war documentary. But even that wasn't the worst mistake Napoleon made. No, the worst mistake was Russia. In 1812, Napoleon decided to invade Russia with the largest army ever assembled in European history, roughly 600,000 men. On paper, this looked unstoppable. In reality, it worked about as well as showing up to a snowball fight wearing a bathrobe. The Russians refused to fight Napoleon the way he wanted to be fought. Instead of standing still and getting destroyed, they retreated deeper and deeper into their own territory, burning their own cities and crops as they went, so the French had nothing to eat. Napoleon marched 600 miles into Russia, reached Moscow, and found it abandoned and burning. He sat in the ruins of Moscow for 5 weeks, waiting for the Russian Tsar to come and surrender. The Tsar never came. And then Russian winter arrived, early and brutal. Napoleon's retreat from Moscow became one of the most horrifying events in military history. Temperatures dropped to minus 30 degrees. Soldiers froze to death on the march. Horses died by the thousands. Men who had marched into Russia full of confidence stumbled back frostbitten, starving, and broken. Of the 600,000 men who crossed into Russia, fewer than 100,000 came back. 600,000 in
100,000 out. Let that sink in.
After Russia, it was over. Not immediately. Napoleon fought on for 2 more years with the desperate energy of a man who simply could not accept defeat. But Europe's powers had finally united against him, and the numbers were impossible. In 1814, Paris fell. Napoleon was exiled to the island of Elba, a tiny island off the coast of Italy. It was meant to be a comfortable retirement. Napoleon escaped within a year. He returned to France, marched to Paris, and his old soldiers, sent to arrest him, defected to his side instead. For 100 days, he was back in power. Then came Waterloo, June 18th, 1815. Napoleon was defeated by the British and Prussian armies. It was close, agonizingly close, and historians still debate whether slightly different decisions could have changed everything. But it wasn't enough. This time, the exile was permanent. Napoleon was sent to St. Helena, a volcanic island in the South Atlantic, 1,200 miles from the nearest major landmass. He spent the last 6 years of his life there, getting heavier, complaining constantly, and dictating the version of history he wanted people to remember. He died in 1821. He was 51 years old.